Hey there! Today I'm doing something a little different and sharing a card that focuses on stamping and coloring. So when I first saw the stamp set, I automatically went to Slider card because I love doing interactive cards. But I wanted to do something and share something a bit different. So the stamp set is called Vrooming By, and it's the stamp version of a digital stamp Gerda Steiner has. And the title of it made the dog sound like it was going on a scooter and it was going really, really fast. So I wanted to depict that properly, that he was going fast and he was just vrooming by. So I thought about how to do this, and I decided that using stamp generations would depict this, and the coloring plays a large role in making this card. So I stamped out this dog on the scooter and created a mask from a full-size adhesive post-it. And I'm putting it into the stamp positioner and stamping down the first generation. And I double stamp this just so I have the darkest impression I can get for it. And I'll go ahead and mask this off. And I'll move it down, I believe, just about an inch or so. And that will be for the second generation stamp. So once I have that perfect and the mask is on properly, I'll stamp it again and I'll have the second generation. And I noticed I missed the wheel, so I pressed it down carefully. And I move it down again another inch, and I'll move the mask and put it on the second dog, and I'll stamp it again. And that creates the vrooming by effect. But of course, it just looks like you have three stamps on here. So you really have to color it up to make it look like he's vrooming by. So for the first dog in the card, I'm coloring him up with bright colors. And this is one of my favorite combinations of colors, teal and pink. And if you watch my other videos, you'll know that I use a combination of Copics and Spectrum Noir markers. I'm still building my Copic collection since they are much pricier, but I do like using them together and I haven't had any issues. So for most parts of the coloring, I use 1 to 2 Copic colors, and usually I'll just use the darkest colors first, lay those down at the edges where I want to depict a little dimension, and then I'll blend it out with the lighter color. I'm not an expert at coloring, and so this is why this card is a little different for me, because normally I focus on an interactive element to a card, and this one is literally just coloring. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm just gonna play a little music and I'll pop up for some parts. For the Spectrum Noir colors I'm using, I can't really show the caps since the numbers have rubbed off. I use them a lot, but I'll have all the colors I'm using down below in the description bar if you're interested. So now that I'm done coloring the first dog, the second and the third will be variations of gray. The second will be a darker gray, and the last one will be very light. And I still want to show some dimension on the dogs, so I'll use 2 Copic colors for each of the dogs. And I think the cool tone grays worked really perfectly for this effect. Now that I'm done coloring the three dogs, I need to create a scene for this behind him. And when I have a card where I spend a lot of time on an interactive element or it has lots of coloring, I like to finish it off in a simple way. So my go-to way of doing this is to kind of cheat and use distressings. They're just so easy to use and they quickly can color up a background. So for this scene, I want to ground the dog so he's scooting on a road. So I'll just use a ruler to mark off the road right underneath the wheel, and I'll mask this off and use black soot distress ink. I'm using Nina 80-pound cardstock for this card, and it takes a bit of blending on this type of paper. Normally, I use Bristol Smooth cardstock because it's just a lot easier to blend, at least for me. And with the Nina cardstock, it takes a little bit more of elbow grease to get it blended nicely. But it's the pavement and it doesn't have to look completely perfect. It's just dark enough where it looks like the ground. And once I'm happy with how the ground looks, I'll move on to adding some grass. And you don't really need the grass, but I think it's a nice transition between the ground and the sky. So I'm using variants of green in two Copic markers, one lighter and one a little bit darker. And I'm flicking a line from the ground upwards to the sky. And it's a little tricky around the wheels of the scooter, but I'm not too worried about precision. I wanted to trim this card down a bit, so I'm using one of the frames from My Favorite Things Blueprint 27. It'll give the card a nice scallop border, and once I die cut that out, I'm going to go ahead and color the sky up with distress ink in scattered straw. And I find that yellows have a very forgiving effect, where if it's not blended perfectly, it's light enough where you can't really tell. And the last element for this card is to add the sentiments. And this small stamp set actually has a lot of them, so I wanted to use one at the top of the card and one at the bottom. For the top portion, since it's against a yellow sky, I'm just stamping it in Momentum Tuxedo black ink. For the bottom portion, since I colored the ground in black, I'm going to heat emboss the sentiment. Of course, I'll lay down the sentiments and make sure it looks straight. Then I'll use the powder tool so the powder doesn't stick to places I don't want it to. Using Versamark ink to stamp the sentiment, I'll go ahead and add white embossing powder, and I think that the white really pops against the black. And once I'm done, I'll use a swifter cloth just to wipe off that excess powder. To finish off this card, I picked a color cardstock that matched the scooter, and I adhered it to the front panel, and then adhered that to an A2 card base. So now this card is done. I think it's a pretty simple card because it's just mainly coloring, but it looks pretty cool to me. What do you think? Thanks for stopping by and checking out this card. It's kind of out of my comfort zone, but I figured I'd share it anyway. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.